Councillors, if that's okay, right, Brendan? Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the Planning Development Committee meeting for July 2021. This meeting is open to the public and will also be live streamed. I'd like to thank all of you in the room with us today and acknowledge everyone who's watching on Council's social media channels. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guybil and Jarrawa peoples, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the rich traditions and bold ambitions of Australia's First Peoples. I acknowledge our portfolio leader, Councillor Carl, who's just running a little bit late, you councillors in the room today, the Chief Executive Officer and the all staff from the Planning and Development Group. We have one apology today from the Mayor, Councillor Paul Antonio. He will not be attending. I don't think we have any applications for leave of absence. So with that, we will go to our first item, which is item number 3. Do I need a motion, Wendy, about accepting Paul's? No. Deferred payment of infrastructure charges, and Dave Quinlan is going to come and introduce us to someone who hasn't presented at Council before, Kate. So I will welcome you. Thanks, Dave, and thank you for introduction.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, councillors. This report has been put together by Kate Rossier, who's new to the branch, who comes from SPED. Madam Chair, I think it'd be best if Kate be given the opportunity, first time presenting to Council.
Okay, welcome, Kate.
Good on you.
Good morning, Chair and Councillors. Today we are seeking an extension on the deferred payment of infrastructure charges policy. The purpose of this policy is to demonstrate Council's commitment to the development in the region by deferring the payment of infrastructure charges for a period of up to 12 months. It is a low-risk, relatively inexpensive opportunity, taken up about 8 times over the last couple of years. I would like to point out a slight typo in the report where it says 886. And it alleviates the challenges of cash flow associated with development. The policy identifies when Council might agree to extend the payment period for charges levied for an approved development and the conditions of such a deferment. It states the applicant must provide Council with an unconditional and irrevocable bank guarantee of the full amount of the levied charge and enter into an infrastructure agreement. Council officers recommend the policy be extended for 3 years until mid-2024 in line with our policy framework. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kate. Are there any councillors got any questions for Kate?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Kate. Kate, I'm just pointing out the last 2 years, the uptake of this policy, and importantly, that those funds have already been recovered by Council. Is that the case?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Through you, Madam Chair, Councillor, yes, on 2 or 3 occasions over the last couple of years, we have had to access the bank guarantee to ensure payment of the infrastructure charges. Typically, this has been on comparatively small developments, not a lot of money involved. There is a slight amount of administration. We, in effect, place the bank guarantee on the counter of the bank and the bank cuts the cheque. We think this is a comparatively small cost, given that it's seen so favourably by the development industry.
Yeah. Just to follow up, if I could, so that the quantum of applications that were granted deferrals was 86, is that right?
As Kate just said, there's a slight typo there. It's 8.
8, right.
In fairness, I think it's crept in when we were drafting it. Officers had a view it was 6 or 8. That turned to 8/6, and that, through editing, turned into 86. I do apologise.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Councillor Shine?
Yeah, just wondering, is there any add-on as a result of the deferment? In other words, a penalty, not penalty, but a fee or interest or anything like that payable on top of the usual infrastructure charge?
Through you, Madam Chair, certainly there is not interest payable. We take a bank guarantee, an unconditional bank guarantee for exactly the amount of the payment. This is because we typically only issue it for a 3-month period. So somebody's sealing their plan, they have monies coming in from pre-sales typically, so they'll only seek something like 3 months. They have an incentive to resolve things quite quickly because they are still making interest payments on those bonds to their institution. We don't anticipate there'll be a change in the infrastructure charges during that period. If we thought it was, and it was near September where the prescribed charge may be lifted and subsequently approved by council, yes, we can add a little bit more to that bond, but people do pay a fee to enter into the infrastructure agreement. So there is a mild fee there which I believe would pay for the administration. It's not overly significant. Now certainly if we were processing the cashing in of 100 bonds a year, that would be significant. The reality is it's extremely rare for us to cash in a bond. In the 10 years I've been here, I'd say us seeking a bond, even through maintenance bonds, other things we take, 1 or 2 a year maximum.
Is there any fee payable to a bank, for that bond by the council at all?
Oh, no, the fee is not payable, through you, Madam Chair. Councillor, the fee is not payable by us. All those costs in terms of obtaining the bank guarantee are paid by the applicant. The applicant does pay a flat fee to the bank, as I understand it, plus an infrastructure charge, an interest rate charge, which is typically payable 6 months in advance on that interest. Every time they go over the 6 months, they pay something like 2%. In a high interest rate environment, bonds were much, much, much more popular. As you can see, with very low interest rates at the moment, as the cash interest rate approaches the bond interest rate, they become less and less popular. At the moment, there's probably only 1% difference or so between the two, depending on the financial strength of the applicant, and so we're seeing less attraction for going for bonds. After all, the applicant has to demonstrate to the bank that they're good for the money, as it were.
Thank you.
Dave, can I just ask, last year we extended the time, didn't we? So has that now gone back to the original, I gather?
Madam Chair, you might recall as COVID first hit us, we were concerned about how we might assist the development industry. We had the policy in place. The policy allows us, or as officers, to determine the period that the charge will be deferred for. We came to council, I think, under an information session, not seeking a change to the policy, but rather making council aware of a change in principle of practice. We typically always issued these for only 3 months, and at that time we gained, I suppose, notional approval from council to issue it for up to 12 months because of COVID. I don't think we really needed to move on that at all. There might have been one. Typically it's to get people over that hump of paying the infrastructure charge before sealing the plan and then gaining the income from the sale. Mm-hmm. So they're typically not looking for a long period of time, just an ability to get over that hump. 6 months is typically plenty for that. The bond, the important thing to understand about those financial securities is that they are unconditional from the financial institution. Even if that entity were to go into, the applicant were to go into receivership, go broke, bankrupt, doesn't matter, we get our money first.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Is there any further questions for the officer? The recommendation is there. Can I have someone recommend that we adopt the updated policy 2.49, deferred payment of infrastructure charges policy? Attachment 2, Councillor Vonhoff, the seconder, Councillor McMahon. Does anyone want to go into a debate? All those in favour? It's carried. Thank you, Kate. Well done.
Thank you.
Well done. That brings us to item number 4, which is the Regional Development Statistics Report for May 2021, and General Manager Stuart Summers is going to take us through that. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, councillors. Look, I'll be brief. I'll just run through the normal stats, which are lot approvals. In April, we had 7 lots approved compared to 0 lots in May. In April, we had 4 lots sealed, and in May we had 16 lots. So those figures are fairly modest. Dwelling approvals, on the other hand, in April we had 125 compared to the May figure of 98. And units, we had 21 units in April and 10 in May. The May value of development, of built development figures also reflected that slight trend downwards. In April, we had about $61 million of building works across the region compared to the May figure of about roughly 43 million. So I might leave it there. Any questions in relation to any of the stats?
Councillors have any questions for the General Manager? No one? Thank you, Stuart. Can I have someone move that the report of the General Manager, Planning and Development Group on the regional development statistics for May 2021 be noted by Council? Councillor Summerfield, Councillor O'Shea, all those in favour? Carried.
Thank you, councillors.
Could I have someone move that an adjournment? Councillor McMahon and Councillor O'Shea, all those in favour? Thank you. It's carried.
You up there?
Becky, you're up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sitting here waiting for the... You're on. How are you, Karen? Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan, I was taken by your tulle skirt.
Good.
So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Water and Waste Committee meeting of Toowoomba Regional Council for July. This meeting is open to the public and will also be live streamed. I'd like to thank everybody who's in the room today and acknowledge everybody who's watching online. I'd also like to acknowledge Deputy Mayor McDonald, Portfolio Leader Councillor Summerfield, CEO Mr Pigeon, General Manager Mr Platts. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guyabal and Jarowair peoples, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We have the absence of Councillor Antonio to note, but other than that, no apologies requiring a motion and no declarations. We move on to item number 3 of the agenda, amendments for the 21-22 Register of Fees and Charges for Water Operations. John, you're there. Will you be speaking to this one?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
thank you. Over to you, John.
Morning, councillors. Now, just a slight amendment to the 21-22 fees and charges in relation to Pittsworth and where it fits in the rod and tag system. So we just need to move Pittsworth from where it is now up into the rod and tag system.
Councillors, are there any questions? No questions. That being the case, may I have a mover for the recommendation? Councillor Summerfield, a seconder. Councillor Carol Taylor, all of those in favour? Motion is carried. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
You ran all the way for that. Goodness me. Councillors, we move on to item number 4, bulk curbside waste collection. And we've got Matt here to speak to that. Over to you. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, councillors. In May this year, a report was presented to Council with options for a bulk curbside waste collection service, with the recommendation that Council not proceed with the implementation of any form of service. Council resolved at its ordinary meeting that a further report is provided outlining options and costs for a trial. This report today provides the requested information in relation to how a trial would operate, but maintains a recommendation to not proceed with a bulk curbside waste collection service. Should Council wish to proceed with a trial, it is recommended that the suburbs of North Toowoomba, Harlexton, Newtown and Darling Heights are included. This is based on the level of community support provided through our Waste Community Survey, along with other factors including topography and proximity to the Toowoomba City. It's recommended that any trial require a level of resource recovery, with Council not being prescriptive in how this occurs, but leaving that up to the tenderers. Funding of $500,000 is required to undertake the trial, as per the previous report. This is estimated to provide sufficient funding to service 2,500 properties. However, this will be further refined following tendering once we understand the actual costs involved. In relation to timing, there is currently no budget available for development of the program and specifications. Therefore, funding would be required at Budget Review 1 if Council wishes to proceed. Based on the timing for tendering, the actual trial will be able to take place early in the 2022-23 financial year. As mentioned, while the report outlines how a trial could occur, it's recommended that Council not proceed with any form of bulk curbside waste collection service. The previous report presented to Council outlined a range of risks and concerns, including scavenging, illegal dumping, public amenity and impact on other. Over the past period, additional information has been collected from other senior staff at each of the 6 councils with over 100,000 population that offer a service to gain further insight into the realities of running a bulk curbside collection service. The de-identified comments from these councils are included as attachment 3, and these confirm that officers see the services as very expensive, not good value for money and not aligned with the principles of good waste management. In summary, implementation of a service will increase Council's overall risk, does not align with Council's waste management strategy of reducing waste to landfill, and is not considered good value for money for the community. It is therefore recommended that this initiative not proceed.
Okay, thank you, Matt. I think you might have a couple more questions than John had. So, councillors, I'm in your hands. Questions? Councillor McMahon.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Matt. Just wanting to pick your brain a bit around the trial. Thanks for doing what we asked and coming back with a trial in depth regarding that. I noticed Wilsonton, Harlexton, Darling Heights are the focus of a trial. Just wanted to drill down into that a little bit more because it's still user pays and rather expensive, but I just am wondering, I know that's a trial, I would argue houses are pretty close together in those suburbs, and it would be relatively easier for council officers to do this in those suburbs as opposed to Pittsworth or a regional town of Toowoomba region. While this trial has these prices, would they be significantly different should we offer this to those areas?
Yes, so that's one of the key reasons why in the trial I've recommended the 4 Toowoomba suburbs, because yes, it certainly would be cheaper to undertake the service in the Toowoomba township, because we would be sending vehicles, collection trucks specifically to do those collections, and obviously the travel time adds a cost to that. However, if you were to roll this out across the entire region, Toowoomba is the critical mass, and there is a much larger proportion of the population in Toowoomba. So while in a trial it potentially would skew the costs quite significantly, if it were rolled out across the whole region, the cost impact would be much less, simply because of the proportion of residents in the Toowoomba versus our regional towns.
Okay, sure. Chair, follow up if I may on a different note. The attachment 3 info is quite condemning, and I note it's been de-identified just via probably the Lord Mayor's social media. I know Brisbane have reintroduced this service as of last week, and whilst it's de-identified, they all say vividly no. I wonder if you had any info on how or why they might have introduced it against their obvious officer's recommendation here. Is there anything that we need to be told about that?
Quite simply, the feedback from every other council is that once you implement a service, the community becomes very unhappy if you try to take that service away. So that's very, very strongly the feedback that we've had. In the case of Brisbane, only a couple of months ago there was a rally that was held to reintroduce the service. So the community obviously have had it there for decades, and they feel that it's a right of their that their council will provide the service, and so taking it away is simply not palatable And that's quite simply the reasoning here, and why a number of councils have indicated that they wouldn't recommend introducing a service, because once you do, it's basically, it will be there to stay.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Councillor Shine.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. Matt, just could you explain why attachment 2 is confidential?
Attachment 2 outlines the detailed costs to undertake a trial. So while we've said that 500,000 is our cost in total, the attachment outlines what proportion of that cost is what we would expect the tendered amount to be versus what would be other costs in terms of internal costs and other setup costs. If we were to release that attachment publicly, we would be giving the market a very strong indicator as to the tender amount that we would be expecting. So we wouldn't want to influence any tenders that we might receive.
Having said that, though, in your open report, you do mention figures.
Yes.
And much the same as what's in the...
Yeah, it's quite simply the breakdown. So while we can talk about the total figure and the cost per property, which is based on the total figure, it's the breakdown that we don't want to release publicly, because it would influence our procurement.
Right. The report that you've presented is presenting a strong case, offers a strong case against the proposal. You were asked to identify the options and to provide the cost. Why did you think it was necessary to present that argument against it as well?
Quite simply, I suppose, as an officer, it's our role to provide frank advice and recommendations to council. In this instance, as officers, we see this as as not something that we would recommend to implement. While we did while we did carry out what was asked in relation to how a trial would occur, the overall recommendation didn't change from the previous report. So the point of view of officers didn't change.
And by and large, it'd be fair to say that the arguments didn't change either.
That's correct, yes.
If I might, Chair, you would agree that nearly 70% of the people in the survey, of the 913, supported the introduction of the service.
Yes, I would agree to that, with the caveat that only a very small proportion were prepared to pay any significant amount towards it. So I guess it's like any service. If you ask somebody whether they want it, the answer will be yes. If you ask, are you prepared to pay for it, then the answer changes.
But that is that not consistent with what Councillor McMahon has raised with respect to the Brisbane experience, that it's a very popular service, one that was stopped for, might have been temporary purposes, but reintroduced, as he indicated. And I think Ipswich have announced that they're going to bring it in as well.
That's correct. So both a couple of councils stopped for as a cost-saving measure, and they've now reintroduced it due to public demand. Yes.
Okay. In relation to the feedback that you provided, around about under half a dozen headings, you haven't, and it's stated to be de-identified. Why is that? Because it, doesn't enable, for example, councillors who might be interested to ask further questions of the persons to whom you spoke. It doesn't afford us that opportunity, because we don't know who said what or from what council they came from, ever. So can you tell us why that would be why that happened?
So when I spoke to each of the councils, I did mention that their feedback would be used and it wouldn't be specifically identified, and that was really out of respect for the councils and to not create any sort of specific issues between officers and the councillors at those particular councils. So I felt it was the best way of approaching the matter. If we had specifically mentioned councils, we may have we may have looked to make that a confidential attachment so that it wasn't it didn't reflect, poorly or in any certain way on any particular council. It's purely out of respect for those councils.
Just in relation to suburbs, you mentioned, I think there were, from memory, Newtown, Harlingston, North Toowoomba, Darling Heights.
Yep.
Was that about
Yep.
it?
Yep.
Do you know how many houses are in the properties to be serviced in those areas?
Yes, so in total there's around 12,500 properties in there, and we expect a 20% take-up rate. That's what we're anticipating, which comes to 2,500 properties.
And Councillor McMahon also raised the issue of the regional ones, and you explained that travelling distance and so on. But I take it, I think during the discussion in May, it was proposed that Cambodia, for example, fairly close at hand, as a regional hamlet, might be considered. And bearing in mind that, I imagine that these things are carried out with notice to the suburbs saying that on this week that this operation will occur. So, one assumes the travelling would be lessened by that factor. And bear in mind the proximity of Cambodia, you still hold to the view that it's a lot cheaper to do it completely with Toowoomba suburbs?
It would skew the results to some extent, I believe. If we were to undertake a trial and we included a regional township, it would make the cost per property slightly more expensive. Certainly, the suburbs could be modified, and I have looked at how that could be done by including, for example, Cambodia and Wairima, and removing one of the other suburbs. But in relation to how the trial would occur, what we're really wanting to do is move away from a situation where it's known that these streets or this particular suburb will be done in this week or in this 2-week block, because that's where you get really intense levels of scavenging and illegal dumping. So what we wanted to do is the on-call service, where people could ring up and book a service in, and so the rest of the community wouldn't know necessarily where to go to scavenge. So that's why there is definitely a cost impact in carrying out the service in that way.
But people will still have to put their rubbish out on the footpath. Is scavenging such a bad thing? Bearing in mind the big issue seems to be the desire to restrict the amount of rubbish that goes to landfill.
It's not a good thing in terms of public liability, and the fact that councils encouraging waste to be put onto the footpath, and then obviously there's a public liability concern. There's litter across the footpath concern. There's waste that goes strewn across the street into waterways, that type of thing. That's more what we're concerned about. But you are right, by allowing by scavenging occurring, we are creating some level of diversion, but it's just not really in the right way that we would like it to occur.
Just in relation to the public liability issue.
Excuse me, point of order.
I think we're all entitled.
We've got an interrogation of an officer here.
Well, councillors, you're all going to have an opportunity to speak and ask as many questions as you like. I'm comfortable with Councillor Shine finishing his questions, and then I have a list of Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan, O'Shea, Taylor, and then Summerfield.
So I want to move the officer's recommendation. I've had my hand up over here for a long time.
You'd like to move?
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Are you moving a
I am moving the officer's recommendation,
here?
Madam Chair. Thank you.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Carl. Councillor, would you like to go into debate?
If I could foreshadow that if this motion is unsuccessful, I will move an alternative motion.
Thank you, Councillor Shine. Do we have cause for debate?
I do have a question. I wouldn't mind hearing some other questions, to be honest.
Well,
that may be the case, Councillor McDonald, and I'm sure that there are many who would like their questions answered, but we have had
Madam Chair, I'm happy for
moved.
questions to be answered. That was an interrogation, not questions. I'm sorry.
Well, I disagree with you, Councillor Taylor. It was questions.
Coming from you.
I support Councillor Taylor.
It was an interrogation. I'm sorry.
I disagree with that, and I was comfortable with the questions, knowing that all councillors would have their full opportunity on this issue to ask as many questions as they would like. So, Councillor Taylor, can I have clarity? Was yours a procedural motion?
No, I'm moving the officer's recommendation as a motion. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm happy for questions to be taken if they're questions.
Well, that being the case, Councillor Shine, do you have more questions?
Yeah, I do have a few more questions.
Thank you. Please proceed.
No, thank you. In the report on page 70 of Law Books, there is a paragraph dealing with key principles of modern waste management, and it says that one of the key principles is user pays. Can you tell us the basis or justification for that assertion, please?
Certainly. So it's a key principle that's being introduced, or we try to implement in waste management, and it's basically to encourage consumers to take responsibilities for their waste. So that's the intent, and it's a principle that has been rolled out as part of state strategies and national strategies, and it's really it is around that idea of people taking responsibility for their own waste. The terminology I've used there has actually come from a discussion I've had with the Waste Management and Resource Recovery Association Queensland President, who I've spoken to, and that was his words around the type of messaging that we're trying to get across when it comes to managing waste.
If I could, just on that, we have free access to our waste depot, no charges made. Why would you think something different should apply for this?
So in a perfect world, that we should look to change that. That's something that most councils do charge each customer as they come in the gate, and that does encourage this user pays mentality. And certainly that is a topic that perhaps is worthy of some discussion in future, because it would encourage people to think more carefully about what they're taking to a waste facility. But my understanding at this point in time is that council is happy to provide free access to our waste facilities, and it's not something that council has an appetite to change at this point in time. Our waste facilities, the free access to those facilities is funded by the waste utility charge that everybody pays for a wheelie bin service, and if you don't have a wheelie bin service, you pay a fee of $60 or $70 a year, which provides you access to the facility. So while it's not particularly, or not specifically user pays per time you go to the facility, it is being funded by the broader rate base as part of our waste utility charges.
Finally, if I might, thank you, Matt, for your cooperation. You mentioned the public liability aspect in the material that you provided from the other councils, for example. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was only one example of a public liability. They didn't actually say it was a claim, but it might have been an issue, and that was in relation to a baby cutting itself on glass footpath. One wonders why a baby was on them. Anyway. Were there any other examples of public liability?
There were no other examples provided. Councils did raise it as an issue, and our insurance, in discussions with our governance and legal services team, they have identified it as a concern, something we would need to take up with our insurer if we were to proceed. But that is correct. There were no other specific examples provided.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I've got Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Matt. I've got two questions, and I guess most of it's around working out the figures on $30 per collection. So to my mind, when we ask people, what are you prepared to pay, most people are probably going to say nothing to start with. Oh, $30, So we don't have any figures on possibly making a decision at $50 or $60 per collection. So when you work out the figures of what it's going to cost council, is that, for the trial, is that presuming that 2,500 households will all take up the offer? Because you would think that not every house in the area would take up the offer, would they?
No, that's right. So we've worked on the basis that 20% of people would take up the offer. So we would offer the service to approximately 12,500 properties, which is those 4 suburbs. And so 1/5, 2,500 properties is what we're basing it on, which is a 20% take-up rate, which is what we understand.
Okay, so there's not 2,500 houses in that trial area?
No.
That's 20%?
That's 20% of the total.
Sorry, okay. Yep. So then, well, yes, I mean, again, the point that it's $30, I don't know that that's kind of a realistic figure of what other councils charge. Do we have any idea of what that is? Because I was just interested in the results from Council 4, where they've got full cost recovery.
Yep.
So they say scavenging's not a problem, and as Councillor Shine points out, that not any of the councils said that there was any public liability claims for. So I don't know that that's kind of a valid reason not to have it. So with Council 4, why then can they achieve full cost recovery? What sort of price are they setting at?
So it varies. So there's a calculator on their website that gives some indication, but it's between $90 and $130.
So people are obviously prepared to pay for it.
Yes. Yeah. And as I've mentioned before, that's significantly more than what we would see the commercial market doing the same sort of work for, which is a concern. The other point I'd make is if you have a look at the consultation undertaken in the community survey in dot point 3, in the previous report I did include some information about what people were prepared to pay. This time I included further information. So the full feedback from the survey was that 58% of people would be prepared to pay $30, 11% would be prepared to pay $70, 2% would be prepared to pay $100, 2% prepared to pay $120, and 27% not willing to pay at all. So that was the full breakdown.
Yes. That's giving them an option though, but I guess the proof's in the pudding with, say, like these ones that Council 4, where they are prepared to pay more, aren't they?
Yeah, so in relation to a trial, we'd be looking at, if we were to look at full cost recovery, we'd be charging $170. Obviously, when we implement a full service, that does become a little bit cheaper, and the previous report did have costs per property. If we were to have a on-call service available to all residents, we're looking at a net cost of $116 per service, which was included in the previous report, which would be a full cost recovery. The trial's obviously more expensive, just economy of scale.
Mm-hmm. So 116
would be a net no cost to council.
Interesting. Thank you.
Based on the estimates we have.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Councillor O'Shea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Matt. First of all, thank you for your frank and professionalism and honest advice on this. I can, from an officer point of view, as I've said last time, I can totally understand the position you guys have reached, so I do very much appreciate that. My question, what I wanted to ask you about is that the potential introduction of this as a trial and around our waste management strategy, and particularly around that aim of the significant reduction in waste to landfill, and obviously everything that we do in terms of the strategy has to align around those targets that need to be reached. So, and then peel back to that survey that we did, and I think it was 68, or nearly 70% of people felt that the introduction of this service would help in reaching some of those targets. So I guess my question to you from a professional point of view, from your point of view, from an officer, is that, do you not agree with that, or is that not an achievable? Is that something aspirational that the community just feels, or do you think this is something that significantly risks our targets towards that, I suppose, is what I'm trying to grapple with?
So perhaps I didn't word it completely correctly in the report, but the 68% of respondents indicated that they would only want a service to occur if it resulted in increased diversion from landfill. So it wasn't 68% thinking that it would, it was people thinking that it should, like they would only support it if it did. That was the way the question was worded in the survey. So the way it's worded in the report is 68% of respondents believe that a bulk curbside service should ensure that the service results in a decrease in the amount of waste sent to landfill.
So is that possible?
It's not going to result in a decrease of waste to landfill, because we know we're going to get an influx of waste that can't be recycled. Obviously, as I mentioned last time, there are a couple of ways of trying to maximise the amount of waste that we can get out of the curbside collection. One is to send multiple vehicles to each site. The other is to take all the waste, take it to a shed and sort it. Both are valid, and both options have been taken up by one of the councils or a couple of the councils that I spoke to. So both do work. The concern with the shed is just have shed space, particularly for a trial, and the multiple trucks is obviously you've got to look at the things like the carbon footprint that you're creating by sending 2 vehicles to every facility as well, so every house as well. So, if a lot of the councils that I spoke to, they don't have any diversion options at all. So, for those councils, certainly there is an increase in waste to landfill, and we know that the waste levy, is going to apply to everything that goes to landfill as well. So,
any further questions, Councillor O'Shea? Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support this recommendation on many fronts. I think we're really asking questions to try to find a way to justify this. I have to say that we've heard lots of questions. Brisbane city boundaries haven't changed for over 100 years. So Brisbane city is quite condensed. As Matt has mentioned there, and as Councillor Shine's questions about a country area, those small townships are on rural numbering, a lot of them, so that's part of the township. So it would cost a lot more, just by virtue of the fact that you haven't got houses side by side. There's a long frontage, in many cases, many kilometres between them. It's inequitable. 2,500 properties costing $500,000, less $75,000, which you would recover for this trial, leaves, as Matt has said, $175 per property for council. It's not, it might sound attractive, a few people might think that's great, and I know some councillors promised that. I promised lots of things when I went out on the hustings too. I promised that some of our small regional townships would be treated equally. Since 2008 I've promised that, and they haven't been. And so at the end of the day, no one's supported me in that. Whilst this sounds attractive, it costs a lot of money, and it doesn't. It's not equitable. It doesn't service the whole community.
Councillor Taylor, is there a question?
No, I'm speaking to my motion.
Okay, we're still just in the question phase, Councillor
So I don't
Taylor.
have a question. I have never had a question.
Okay, well,
I moved the officer's recommendation.
I understand that. We still have some questions around the table from Councillor Summerfield and Councillor Carl. We might go to those so that all councillors have their opportunity.
Well, the procedure is, actually, you've asked for me. I'm speaking to the motion.
I believed that you had a question, Councillor Taylor. I assure you that you'll have ample time to speak.
It's a point of order, Madam Chair.
And I clarified that if you were asking for a procedural motion, had you asked for a procedural motion, you would have gone straight to the vote. That is not what happened. We are still calling for questions, Councillor Taylor.
Once you have a mover and a seconder for a motion on the books, then the motion should be debated. I have allowed questions to be asked. It cannot go on infinitum.
No, it can't.
I have moved a motion, I have a seconder,
in the interest
and I
of
wish to
equity,
speak to it.
we still have people who have questions to be asked.
And they may well ask that through. I asked the CEO for some advice, please.
Certainly.
I think the process at this point in time is there was a general agreement around the table, but it's also the chair has the control of the meeting at the moment, is allowing questions in relation to this, because it's a complex issue, and I understand that councillors need to understand all of the issues. So when there's respectful questions asked, which has happened to this point, I don't have any problem with it continuing with the questions, and then you could go into the formal part of considering the motion.
Through you, Madam Chair, meeting procedure is what, Mr CEO? We are in a statutory meeting.
We're in a statutory meeting. There was an agreement, and you agreed yourself to allowing questions to happen. The chair has taken that cue and has proceeded on that basis, which I think is a fair basis to allow everyone to have a say and ask a question. So once I would think that the questions are over, you've exhausted your questions, you can then go through the formal process of considering the motion. And the chair has the ability to allow that to happen.
Thank you. So, Councillor Taylor, if you don't have a question at this stage, I'll move to Councillor Summerfield and then Councillor Carl.
There isn't one. Okay, thank you. I'd just like to firstly say that I truly respect our waste manager and the work that he does and the integrity within which he works. And this report is also filled with integrity. And it's very important that I put that on the line because I value the work that our waste manager does, and he provides good deliverables in the waste area, and I'm most appreciative myself, and I'm sure most councillors are. So thank you for that, Matt. But I'd also like to ask, thinking about this moving forward and listening, reading the report where it keeps saying, once this is introduced, you can't get rid of it. And looking at 10 years, 20 years' time, which is if this council supports this today, in 20 years' time, when they're even earlier, when they're starting to talk about, well, they're already talking about zero waste to landfill, and that target will come our way at some time in the future. And so I wonder how this would sit with that moving forward.
Certainly, as you say, the state has very ambitious targets to reduce waste to landfill. From what we understand from other councils, this doesn't reduce waste to landfill. It does you end up with more waste going to landfill. So it's going to become more challenging over time. You need to look at more and more ways to try to separate the waste and the curbside, which obviously comes with added cost. So yeah, it certainly is a challenge that would need to be worked through in years to come. And certainly understanding that once introduced, it's highly likely that the community would expect that it would stay.
Thank you.
No further questions, Councillor Summerfield. Councillor Carl and then Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Chair. Please refresh my memory. It may have passed me by, but has this council had the opportunity to review the waste management strategy in any detail? And how long ago was that?
So Council adopted its waste management strategy in February of this year, and that was our strategy for 2021 through to 2024. So we did have a good discussion at that meeting around what was included in that strategy and our targets are the same as the state government targets.
I'll comment if I may quickly. It's beyond belief that we're actually considering an option that isn't in keeping with our waste management strategy, particularly around generation of waste and how we responsibly and equitably and sensibly deal with that.
I can just make a comment on that. So just in fairness to that strategy, one of the actions from that strategy was to investigate a bulk curbside collection service. So this discussion and doing this is quite in line.
I get that, but based on factual evidence and the 68% that said they didn't want any increased load or unnecessary or diversion from landfill, they didn't want that to affect it. 68% of the respondents.
You're referring to the waste management strategy's desire or aim to reduce diversion.
Yeah, but the respondents said they didn't want to participate in this if it had any effect on our diversion rates, or wouldn't like to see it affect that.
Thank you, Councillor
We know
Carl. Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm just a bit confused about that last comment, actually. 68% of people didn't want diversion. Maybe Matt can elaborate on that.
They didn't want it to affect our diversion rate from landfill. In other words, they didn't want it to have a negative impact on our diversion. Otherwise, they wouldn't want to see curbside collection come in. But we know, without debating, but we know the facts are that we would have an additional expense on top of curbside collection to actually take some measure to separate in an off-site to try and maintain our diversion rates under the strategy.
Matt, can you just clear up that 68%?
Certainly.
figure,
It's
please?
a little bit confusing because 68% of people supported having a curbside collection service. 68% of people also said that they would only like to see a service implemented if it increased the level of diversion that we were achieving.
Gotcha.
So that's where the confusion comes in.
No, I appreciate that. Thanks, Councillor Carr. Madam Chair, through you, I agree and concur with Councillor Summerfield's comments in regard to the report. At some point, officers have to make a recommendation on the information they gather, and certainly that's happened in this case. But I also value the fact that you've done exactly what Council asked to do, Matt, which was to investigate how it could happen, and you've done that. So I thank you for the report. Question in regard to timeframes with this, Matt, and you mentioned around BR1 requests for looking at the logistics, the operations and whatever. What sort of quantum, so first question is what sort of quantum of dollars would be required at a BR1? And secondly, in the report it says that the whole trial could be done within 4 to 5 months. Would that be, so I guess, could the assessment work and the trial all be done in one financial year, rather than trying to put money in BR1 or BR2 this year? Could it be something that could be all put in 22, 23 or another year?
So in answer to your first question, if you look at the confidential attachment 2, where it has the breakdown of costs, you'll see there the costs that we're looking at for the collection contractor, and you'll also see the internal costs we have for landfill and waste levy costs. So it's essentially the other costs there without saying anything, because it is a confidential attachment. So if you sort of take that away from the 500,000, you'll see approximately what we'd be asking for at Budget Review 1. In relation to timing, I guess I was looking at, in line with what Council has requested last time, the earliest we would be able to implement. We did mention in the last report that we're looking at about a 12-month lead time, so, that's in line with that. If we got funding at BR1, we'd be able to get everything in place to commence straight away in the new financial year. Certainly if Council wished, we could look to put the entire program in next financial year, but it could be done sooner if Council wished.
Okay, thanks. Just to follow up, if you would, do you know the timing, Matt, on the other, well, they're not trials, they're being implemented, do you know the timing on those for the other councils when they take place, or is there a schedule?
I think they do a rolling program.
Do they?
So they do it throughout the year, yeah. Most of them, they're all slightly different. Some of them are on call and do it during certain periods and offer it to different wards or different suburbs at different times, but it's generally a rolling program for most of the year.
Thanks.
Thank you. I've got Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan and then Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Matt, can we just go back to the figure that you quoted me before? So if across the entire region had this on-call service at full cost recovery, it'd be $116 per service. Yep. Does that include, so with this Council 4 that I keep going back to, that seem to be doing it fairly well, where they have the 2 trucks and the flat truck collects anything reusable and recyclable, would that include that type of sorting and diversion from landfill?
Yes, so all the estimates provided include that diversion, because that's something that that I see as something we would definitely want to implement. We would want to see diversion, so the answer is yes, it would include that.
Okay, so we could offer this whole service, but forget about the trial, we could offer this whole service to the whole region for $116, which would be on-call and diversion of waste to landfill. Yeah.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Matt. Just a question. The $500,000 for the trial, sorry, let me take it back a step. When you do the trial, does the cost that you have calculated include the sorting as well?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, okay. Thank you.
Councillor Summerfield.
I'll have another crack. Thanks, Mayor. Madam Chair. I just wondered, when you look at those different options there without actually saying any figures, and none of it's in the budget, I'm just wondering whose portfolio the money's going to come out of. Anyone got their hand up to give up a bit of park or a bit of road or
Well,
a bit of IT?
Road. We haven't got
Just a
enough
thought.
now.
Thanks, Councillor Summerfield. Councillor Shine.
Yeah, no, just in relation to what's arisen out of some of the questions that were asked, just a clarification on charges made by other councils. Inquiries that I made of Townsville and the proposed charges at Ipswich, and I think I'm right, were that they were not going to be charged, but it would be incorporated in the general rate that payable. I didn't check any other councils, but is that right, that they don't, those two anyway, don't make any charge?
Yeah, my recollection is there's only one council that charges, the rest are spread across the rate base.
Okay. And just one other point, you mentioned in the report that it's dearer per property to undertake the trial as opposed to an overall, and you said economics of scale or words to that effect. Why is that?
So there's a couple of reasons. One is setup costs. So we're going to have to pay to get things set up, processes, systems in place. We need the staffing to be trained up and know what they're doing. We need specifications written. We have to go to tender. All of those things have cost. When it comes to operating in the longer term, if a company has a long-term assurance that they're going to have work for several years, they would be able to, invest in infrastructure or get cheaper rates, for plant, for offices and sheds, that type of thing. So it's really around that. It's similar to most contracts we have. If you can offer long-term contracts, you will generally get better rates.
Thank you.
Councillor Carl.
Final question from me. Matt, given your extensive information that you've given us, given the fact it's going to cost as a trial, given the fact that there's an established cost recovery of $116 per fee for service, and that's fair enough to say, fee for service, on call, fee for service.
So the 116 is if we were to roll it out everywhere?
Yeah.
The trial's more 170.
I'm assuming beyond the trial.
Yep.
We've heard how these trials mischievously make their way into the system. But given those costs, I might add I'd support a cost. But at $116, given that there would be, it would be somewhat exclusive and non-affordable by those who would probably benefit the most. And given all of that information you give, why would we do, what are we going to get from the trial?
The main thing we're going to get from the trial is pricing.
But we already know that people aren't willing to pay for the service. There's already objection I'm hearing around the room for some costings around that, if I'm reading the tea leaves. And we already have been given $116 for an on-call fee for service. So what is the real reason for the trial if it's costs doesn't cut it with me? I'm not having a crack at you. I'm just questioning in my own mind what is the essence of the trial? What new information or insight are we going to gain outside of the raft of information and external intelligence on this that have been running for decades?
Yep. So hypothetically, if a trial were to occur, I would report back to council on things like our costs, what level of diversion we achieved, the take-up from our residents, number of residents that wish to take up the service, issues that we might have encountered in terms of litter or illegal dumping or those types of things, and generally how the operation worked, how it affected our council operations and any other impacted stakeholders, complaints, those type of things. So that would be broadly what we would come back with. Obviously, we've got information from other councils. All councils are unique to some extent, and we would be able to provide that information.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Matt, because that councils are unique, and we can't be benchmarked equally against other councils around costs, because I've always said it was when I was in the portfolio with Councillor Summerfield, this is a logistics business more so than a waste business, because we don't have the critical mass that the Brisbane Authority does in waste for the population. We have lots of kilometres, and our strategy is geared very differently.
Matt, you've been incredibly helpful with answering all these questions, but if I have two myself, if I can, and both relate to our waste management strategy, which, as Councillor Carl referred to, we endorsed in February of this year, just a few months ago. So that, and please refresh our memories, when we're talking about diversion from landfill in line with that waste management strategy, if people have, I'd like to hear your thinking and how that gels with what we endorsed. If people have things in their home that they don't want anymore, and that we could reasonably expect would be included in bulk curbside collection, if they don't use bulk curbside collection, but they still want to get it out of their homes, they either take it themselves to the tip, they phone a private company, they call their neighbours and say, Jimmy, with your ute, can I put my old lawnmower in the back of your ute, and off it goes. Or I guess there's some who do the wrong thing and put it in one of our bins, and it ends up that we have to deal with that at our end of things. So all of those examples that we have cited in the report, where the diversion to landfill, there's been an increase in the amount of goods that go to landfill. How do you square that? Because don't people still need to get rid of the stuff that they don't want in their house anymore?
That is a very true comment, and there's a couple of points I could make. When someone brings something to a waste facility, it's much easier to sort and separate. So there's the tip shops right there. There's much more opportunities for diversion. So I think at our Greater Toowoomba we've got something like 18 different stockpiles or areas to sort different materials. So we really are going to maximise our diversion if they take it to a waste facility. The other thing is if we were to introduce a service like this, what we would probably see is a big initial glut of excess waste that would be produced. And you're right, people may want to be getting rid of this anyway. It would be far preferable if people look to at where they can give it away. There's charities that do accept these materials as well, or whether there's other alternatives. Essentially, you're right, a lot of people would probably have material they would like to get rid of, but they just don't, and this might just encourage that to happen, which is going to impact our landfill capacity and our levies and costs. So that's probably the best response I can provide there.
Okay, so then from an environmental perspective, is it your assertion that bulk curbside collection does not improve council's environmental impact?
That's correct. I don't see how this would improve our impact at all. We'd be be increasing the amount of waste that we're going to landfill, and we'd be running a lot of vehicles around everywhere picking up materials. So, and we'd also be putting a lot of waste on the curbside, which has obvious hazards for our environment.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question relates to the costs in relation to the waste management strategy. And us as councillors, we always get told, core business, stay in your lane, it's rates, roads and rubbish. And I need to understand if our waste management strategy built into that, and I apologise that I can't remember this, but is our strategy with waste in that piece that we endorsed, that council aims to make money from our waste management, to be cost neutral, or to we accept that we lose money with our waste management?
Our strategy doesn't specifically talk about that. Obviously, we do have a community service obligation in a lot of what we do, so there are areas where we're not going to make a profit per se, but we do recover our costs through our utility charges. So we do look to ensure that we do recover our costs where there are opportunities to make money, and we do this through things like our e-waste and our metals and our tip shops. Where there are opportunities to make money, we do that, but we don't specifically have a strategy that is to make money.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And so at the moment, are we cost neutral in the waste management, and taking into account the state levy as well, or?
Yeah, so our waste utility charges, along with there's an environmental levy as well, that is what funds the waste portfolio. So that's we are effectively cost neutral based on those charges.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question, Madam Chair, thank you.
Please.
Through you. Matt, in the original report, it was said that these people could get privately their bulky goods and that taken away, and there was a cost. I thought it was around $30.
So I think in the
estimated
previous, we put around
yes.
$50.
$50.
Yeah.
So they could get people, and that's beside the charities and others that come and help the elderly and the pensioners. So it was around $50.
Yeah, and as I mentioned last time, it's very hard to ascertain that. That's the best info we could get looking at people's websites. We weren't going to go and ring up a heap of businesses and ask for a quote.
But that was from their house, so that was in their driveway rather than out on a curb.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillors, I said everybody could ask exhaustively their questions. Are there any other questions around the table? That being the case, Councillor Taylor, you have moved that motion. Would you like to speak with it?
I would like to speak to it, and I think that the report and the report that came to us originally speaks for itself. Our community needs to recognise that each individual is responsible for what goes to landfill. And also we have not got any reassurance from the state that we're going to get any money from the levy either. Is that the case, through you to Matt? Because my understanding last week is that there is no, through LGAQ, it has not been declared what's going to happen beyond this next financial year.
That's correct. We have the advance payment is guaranteed through to the end of this financial year.
Yes.
The state budget did not include that in their forward estimates to include that ongoing advance payment, so there is uncertainty there.
And there's been tremendous work from LGAQ, and there has still been no reply. So I think the signs are ominous. The original report that went, there's private collection, is $75, which is a lot less than it's going to cost council. Council needs to understand we're a whole of council. We're a whole of council. So Councillor Summerfield mentioned who's going to give up money. Well, I can tell you that our city, footpaths around this city and in our region are falling kilometres and kilometres behind every year. Our roads are in a really bad state, and that's just in my portfolio. So I can tell you that I am tired of getting all the complaints, and then we go and consider spending money on something that isn't really crucial in my view. Should it be adopted as business as usual, then there's a big black hole in our budgets going forward forever. We can tell ourselves that it's a better way to recover recyclables and for things to be used, but it's said in there, 4 councils send it straight to landfill. Every council that's got it wants to get rid of it, and I think if you asked our entire rate base that did they want to pay extra money on their rates to have this service so a percentage of our community could use it, I don't think there's too much doubt on what their answer would be. So I think that, you know, we can sit here and make ourselves feel good because a few people want to do it. Everyone will pay for it. I'd rather see it bought in than waste, and it is wasting, $425,000 on a trial that only 2,500 people can use. The $425,000 has to come from somewhere, and 2,500 people get advantage of the use of that. That does not stack up as being fair and equitable. And when I made my declaration as a councillor every year since 2000, my declaration says I will treat my community equitably. This is not equitable, and I support the officers. They've put a lot of work into this. Where's this money going to come from? Going forward, are we just telling people, that's okay, you can be wasteful, we'll just pick it up and we'll throw it into landfill, even though the possibility is there that we're not going to get, there's going to be a big back hole from the state government's levy that there's no guarantee we're going to get any. So I think councillors need to think about that. Once you give, it's very difficult to take away. That's a fact. We haven't got it. Brisbane City tried to get rid of it and they couldn't, but they're much different to us. Their boundaries haven't been changed for about 110 years. They're much more compact and much easier to service than our areas would be. And I think our officer has alluded to that. So I just think really we need to treat our community equally, and this is not equitable.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Understanding that there will be an against speaker, Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I speak against this motion because overwhelmingly, to treat our community equitably, we keep hearing the public wants it. So overwhelmingly, they want it. We can provide it where it's not spread across the rate base. It's spread by user pays. They can recycle. Other councils have told us that there isn't a problem with liability or scavenging, and you can do it at a full cost recovery price. So I can't see the reason why we wouldn't do it when there's such a public sentiment that they do want it. I agree. I don't think we should have a trial. I think we should be bringing in the price, $116 for the whole region, on-call service, and it's not spread across the rate base at all. So I think, you know, we need to listen to what the community's telling us. The community tells us they want it, and they want diversion from landfill, which of course we all do, and we can do it at $116 on an on-call basis.
Thank you, Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan. As the seconder, Councillor Carl, would you like to speak for the motion, for the recommendation?
Yes. A few points, Madam Chair, is whilst I can see Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan's reasoning, I don't think under that scenario we would be achieving much at all. I mentioned exclusivity around price. I do agree it should be user pay. We should be responsible waste generators. We are all generators of waste. Doesn't matter whether we're old, young or in between. We are generators of waste and we need to contribute. However, as you suggested before, that waste that people want to get rid of but it sits in their home, I dare say would probably still sit in their home at $116 for an on-call service. So we're not achieving anything, really, in my view. Waste should be run cost neutral. But to run it cost neutral, we need to prioritise what is really important and the most efficient way and cost-effective way to deliver a cost-neutral service to our community. It's really not cost-neutral because the ratepayers are paying for everything. So, and I am a ratepayer, if I think about this sensibly and practically, do I want to afford a methodology applied to my waste, treatment of waste and how I handle it that is proven to be less efficient to the overall cost of my rates and cost of living? Well, I think I could answer that one really simply. Another point that I wish to raise is the ineffective way in which we engage or employ such methods, namely this one, around, and we've heard ad infinitum from the officer and others, the most cost-effective way of dealing with our waste streams and diversion from landfill is at the point of source curbside collection. Bin collection, not bulk collection, and it's handled through our facilities where we get the most efficient diversion rates and the most cost-effective service for our community. I agree, there's a CSO. There is a way in which you run a waste management sector, and that is the least cost to our community. The other point that I wish to raise is, and I shudder. Whilst I appreciate public liability, and that was jumped on by some around the room as, oh, there's only been one incident over so many years. That's a smokescreen. It's a smokescreen. The real issue, the real cost, is around diversion from landfill, how we handle our waste streams cost efficiently and most effectively. I think we should stick to our strategy. I think we should revisit our strategy, please, and re-prosecute our priorities and what is really important under our strategy. And this strategy, as part of the strategy, was to investigate. I just think it's a trial that will tell us what we obviously know now, maybe in a little bit more detail, but we'll have spent nearly $500,000 on the exercise just to give us a little bit more detail. And that is that it's not an efficient way, cost-effective way to deal with it for our ratepayers. And another point I'd like to raise is the way in which trials are presented. Mischievously, and we've heard trials started in other areas become permanent, and we're relegating ourselves to a less than efficient way of dealing with our waste streams. In closing, we are all generators of waste. We all have an accountability to deal with our waste, and we should not ask others to subsidise our generation of waste by subsidising less than efficient methods of dealing with those waste streams. We should all demand what is the most efficient, productive and environmentally safe way of dealing with our waste. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Carl. Do I have another speaker against the recommendation? Councillor Shine.
No, thanks, Chair. Just to raise a couple of points that probably have been raised in May, but it's worthwhile repeating a couple of them. The first one that I want to raise is the issue that you raised yourself, Chair, and that is that what do people do if they don't have this service, they haven't got a ute, they haven't got a trailer, they don't have access to that, then the waste, the rubbish, stays within their own confines. Is that a desirable thing, or should waste really be where it's designed to be, and that is a waste disposal depot? It's very clear that the people of Toowoomba, through extensive survey, a very positive response in terms of the number of people who completed it, nearly 70% of people do want this service. And I just think, as a matter of democratic representation, that we should, if at all possible, respond to the expressed wishes of the people of the Toowoomba region. And it is a regional thing, not just a city thing as well. The recent developments in Brisbane, where it was stopped and then an outcry occurred and the same administration has brought it back in, and likewise in Ipswich. 5 out of 6, I think, Matt indicated, of the major councils in Queensland have this service, and all but one, I think, don't charge for it as well in terms of the specific fee for service. So we're hardly breaking new ground here. It's something that other Queenslanders enjoy to a large degree, and therefore I think we should accede to the wishes of our community. It's been said before, I think you said it yourself, Chair, that the primary, or the popular expectation of the council is that they deal with rates, roads and rubbish. This comes within that core duty of councillors to address. You know, having been out in the regions often enough and listening to the concerns, particularly about roads of country people, I appreciate the argument that Councillor Taylor raised before. But what's not mentioned is what we might be spending on, for example, a project like the Russell Street refresh. Somehow or other, footpaths and roads are not mentioned when that topic is raised. I believe that it is equitable to bring this in without a charge, in fact, like we don't charge for attendances at galleries or libraries. And in fact, we don't charge for attendances at the waste disposal dump itself. So if it's inequitable because not everyone's going to use the service, why is it somehow equitable for people to, with respect to art galleries and libraries, etc.? Those were the arguments that were raised before. I don't want to go on in length about it. It's something that I think we should respect if we are able to respect, I think we should respect the wishes of the people of Toowoomba if we are at all able to do so. I think the trial will illuminate, as Matt said, the cost of it, the actual cost of it, the degree of uptake and defects or attributes associated with it. It's a entirely sensible thing for a responsible council to undertake, and I commend the trial, and I urge councillors to oppose the motion that we are discussing now.
Thank you, Councillor Shine. Do I have another speaker for the recommendation? Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to tell you about an experience I recently had, and that was going through the city of Tamworth, and all the curbsides were covered in couches, boxes, bits of timber in piles, all sorts of things. It was a real eyesore, and I was really disappointed because Tamworth's very pretty. So you can imagine my surprise when I came through 7 days later and it was worse, because more rubbish was put out on the curbside. It's not a good look for towns or cities. There are services available. We have small businesses out there delivering these services, and probably quite a bit cheaper than we are capable of doing. I know earlier in the year I had a run on white goods, and it was like they were all talking to each other, let's break down now. And it was $70 to have the old white good taken away and replacing the new one. So it's a lot cheaper than we would be able to do. There are small businesses doing it. There are charity organisations that do it either subsidised or for free to pensioners and the like. So if we're thinking about people who can't afford to do it, there are those other options out there which would work out cheaper, particularly if we make it user pay. And if we don't make it user pay, you're looking at, let's face it, a 1.5% rate increase just for providing a bulk curbside pickup, compared to all the other things that we've got to increase our rates for. So we have to seriously consider all that. The poor waste and environmental outcomes are very clear in my mind, and certainly very clear in the report. I think we need to remember that. Someone mentioned that scavenging isn't a problem. Well, according to the other councils that were surveyed, scavenging is a problem. I think all 6 of them said scavenging is a problem. So it's really important that we take this seriously. It's not just a whim because we want to be seen to be looking good in the community. This is a really serious issue that's going to impact councils, not for just this term, but for terms for eternity, because we've all heard how hard it is to remove it once you've introduced it. So if you start thinking about, you know, I'm going to look good if I put my hand up and vote against this, think about what you're doing to future councils as well, particularly considering it's the equivalent of a 1.5% rate increase if we do this. So I urge you all to think seriously about this before you put your hand up to vote against the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Summerfield. Do I have another speaker against the recommendation? No. That being the case then, councillors, the recommendation...
I'd like to sum up. Thank you,
I'm
Madam
sorry,
Chair.
Councillor Taylor, please.
This trial will cost our ratepayers $425,000. Councillor Shine's comment about the 913 respondents out of 170,000 residents. It's not an overwhelming response. And part of that response was that 27% of those 913 respondents are not willing to pay anything for their rubbish to be taken away. Householders have access to private collections of their bulky goods for an estimated cost of $75. $75 taken from their driveway more than likely help to carry it out. It costs councils a whole lot more than $75,000. Councillor Megan's point at $119 per household, should it be over the whole area, a user pay, according to the consultation that was undertaken, only 2% of respondents would use the service at $119. Talking about liability, I come in every day down Drayton Road. It's one of our narrowest and busiest roads. It carries about 16,000 cars and trucks a day. In Drayton Road, there's often large, bulky goods there left on a weekly basis. And there's the footpaths, they're left on the footpath. Buses and vehicle movements are hindered there. And there's couches and whatever. They're left there on a weekly basis. Councillor Shine mentions the Russell Street refresh. That's one of the oldest areas of Toowoomba. It has every service known to man underneath the footpath down there. What they're getting down there is a safer, even footpath, because the footpath was not even. It had been patched and it sloped over to the road, upgraded services and livability with trees and artwork that are going down there. Money invested that's going to provide amenity and safety for our community for years to come. Roads and footpaths and other infrastructure such as parks give our community benefit and connectivity for an enjoyment for many, many years. So it's something tangible that's spent there that lasts, and whether people think it's sexy or not, it provides a service to our community ongoing. So I think that we as councillors need to be very responsible for how we spend our ratepayers' money. And Councillor Summerfield makes a good point, 1.5% on their rates. If we're wanting to do that, let's go to the community and ask the entire community if they want to pay an extra 1.5% to have a curbside pickup should they require it. So I think that it's been comprehensively covered in the May report and in this report, and there's every reason why we can't provide an equitable service. And if we do, I'm not totally against a user pay. We would find that we have found by the respondents, the consultation that's been taken, only 2% of people are prepared to pay the $119. So I think it's only responsible that we spend ratepayers' money in the way that they expect us to, and the officer's recommendation I support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. So we'll move to the vote. The recommendation is before us that Council not proceed with the implementation of a bulk curbside collection trial. Councillors, all of those in favour of the recommendation? All of those against? 4 against, 5 in favour. So the recommendation is carried. Correct, Brian? Sorry. So I will indicate in favour of the recommendation that council not proceed with the implementation of a bulk curbside collection trial, so therefore 6-4.
Could they be recorded, please?
No, it's committee.
We'll go to the ordinary meeting and then it'll be... Okay, thank you, councillors. Thank you, Matt, for that as well. We move on to item number 5. Quote or tender consideration plan for the collection and disposal of waste paint. Matt, you're up again.
Sure. Thank you, councillors. Council currently accepts waste paint at our waste management facilities. Disposal of the paint has historically been tendered and council has paid for removal of the paint from our sites. An opportunity has arisen to join the Paint Back Stewardship program that will allow the collection and responsible remanufacture or reuse of paints at no cost. As this is a stewardship program authorised by the ACCC, the costs are paid for by those customers purchasing the paint, and it's not possible for other companies to provide competitive quotes to undertake the same work. Engagement of Paint Back has numerous benefits to our community, including acceptance of 100 litres of paint per customer rather than the current 10 litres, acceptance from commercial customers rather than just domestic customers, and a cost saving to council of around $25,000 per year in the collection and disposal costs. Based on the proposed benefits, it's recommended that the quote or tender consideration plan included as attachment 1 is adopted, allowing direct engagement of Paint Back for the collection and disposal of decorative and architectural waste paints at Greater Toowoomba Waste Management Facility.
Thank you. Councillors, questions for Matt? Councillor Carl.
Thanks, Chair. Matt, just aware of paint recyclers in town, what sort of an impact is this likely to have on those if we are receiving old paint at our facilities? What happens to that? Is this likely to affect their businesses, paint recyclers?
We don't believe so, no. In the past, we've never had any local paint companies that have put in for the work that we do with council to take our paints. So we tendered for the work in 2019 and we did not receive any local paint companies that do that type of work wishing to accept our paints.
No, I guess my question was more coming from the angle that if we are offering that service, am I interpreting that right at our facilities? That may dilute the streams of paint or the collection of paint for some of the business. I know at least one, possibly two in town paint recyclers, so it may dilute their collection if it's going to our facilities under a tender process. I mean, it does now, but do you know what I mean?
It may do. We've always provided a service, but only to domestic residents.
Yes.
So obviously we're opening up to the commercial market, so we will receive more of that paint. There was previously a paint back provider in Toowoomba, and they have ceased operation. That's why we've been offered this.
Okay.
The other point I'd make is that we can end this engagement by providing 30 days written notice at any time. So if, for example, a local company came to us and said we'd be interested in offering a similar service and would be competitive, we would be able to end this engagement and go through a full formal procurement process, allowing the local company the opportunity.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors?
Happy to move it.
No? You're happy?
No, I'm happy to move it if you need.
So the recommendation has been moved by Councillor McDonald. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Summerfield. It's there before you in two parts. That council prepare a quote or tender consideration plan for the collection and disposal of waste paint without first seeking quotes or tenders under Section 230 of the Local Government Act 2012. And part two, that the council adopt the quote or tender consideration plan, collection and disposal of waste paint in attachment 1. All of those in favour? That motion is carried. Thanks very much, Matt. And that concludes the meeting, 10:34. And councillors, perhaps we break for 15 minutes for morning tea before going to...
Madam Chair, there's nothing on our committee.
Oh, well,
so I suggest we go forward and finish. That'll be the finish of the meeting, and go back to...
No, we've still got...
Confidential, yes, but and after this, is that Mr CEO, is that what you think? Yes, I think so. So we haven't got any items. Thank you. Good morning, councillors and Deputy Mayor councillors and people watching on our media devices. I'd like to open our meeting and declare we have no, and I'm recognising our portfolio leader, Councillor Melissa Taylor, declare we have no items on the agenda today and close our meeting. Thank you. And I now suggest, Councillor Von Hoff, that we have a 15-minute break. Thank you.
Councillors, can I have someone move that we move into confidential, please? Councillor Taylor, Councillor Melissa Taylor. All those in favour? Thank you. So item number 6 is Brendan's right? Yep. The Development Services Planning and Environment Court Appeals and Compensation Claims. Can I have someone move that we note that report? Councillor Carl and Councillor Summerfield. All those in favour? And item number 7 is the Regional Enforcement Actions for June 2021. Can I have someone move that we adopt that report? Thank you. Councillor Shine and Councillor O'Shea. All those in favour? Thank you, everyone. The meeting's concluded at 11:20. Record time.